Hey everyone, what's going on? This is Don Uguccioni, and we're back with more quick and accessible health and fitness tips. We're going to go maybe a little over 10 minutes with this series because we're starting some interviews. So for my first interview, we have Bob Uguccioni here. Bob is a personal trainer right now, and we're going to talk a little bit about his background, get some questions about what to look for in a trainer, ketogenic diet, and intermittent fasting. But as you might be able to tell from the last name, Bob is my dad, so that automatically makes him pretty awesome.
I was going to say no relation.
Oh, no relation. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
But Bob, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Tom.
Yeah. So, question number one, if you could just tell us a little bit about what got you into wanting to coach people, personal train people, and sort of what led into that for you.
I think mostly what led into that was continuing my athletics later on in my life, and knowing that that was not going to happen unless I was strong enough and flexible enough to do it. So I started playing lacrosse when I was 40, and that wasn't going to happen unless I improved my game. The other thing I sort of knew that I was trained as an athletic trainer, which is mostly to do with injuries and rehab, and I knew there needed to be a meeting of the minds of strength and conditioning professionals and athletic trainers so that we tried to do as much prevention as possible and while increasing performance.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you and I have both done certifications for training, some paper pencil tests and some a little bit more involved. So can you talk a little bit about some of your certifications, what is involved in attaining them, and how that would lead into maybe some questions people would want to ask a personal trainer if they were going to sign up and get some sessions?
Yeah, sure, I can. So I've done several certifications with ISSA, and those were written tests that included multiple choice questions as well as scenarios. So you're given, so and so is a 16-year-old wrestler, and how are you going to train that person to do whatever, or they're 65 years old and they haven't done anything, and so those tests and those questions were pretty well done. The strength and conditioning for ISSA meant that I had to make a video of myself doing the lifts and doing the stretches, as well as showing someone how to do them and how my teaching style would be. And fortunately, I had you and Gina to do that with. And so that's an example of some certifications that required a little bit more than a computer test. We did RKC and Strong First certifications for kettlebells, which meant 3 days on site and judged by all the people there as to whether they wanted you representing their company out in space training people. And those would be the kinds of certifications that you would want to look for. And then of course you want to get the feel of that person. And what kind of questions do they ask you? So, what's your injury level? What injuries have you had in your life? What medications do you take? What medical conditions do you have? And get an idea of, and they might not ask you necessarily what your goals are. You might not know. You might not know what your capabilities are until you get going in it. And they should be able to assess that. And you want somebody that's going to take things from the bottom up and not give you stuff that's too hard right off the bat.
Yeah, and I never did a Strong First certification, but for the RKC, I'm sure Strong First is very similar. This is an example of the kind of certification that you would want a personal trainer to have. So the example I remember is when we were getting ready to take the test. So we get there and you have to take a physical certification, like you have to do a certain amount of snatches, you have to make other physical standards to say, okay, this is like the entrance exam. You can now come in and take our course, maybe 10 or 12-hour days of pretty intense lifting. So all that really says at that point is you're in good shape. Okay, that's great. And they said, this is the final exam, and if you don't pass this, you're not getting a certification. So what that means for those two particular certifications, or the one that I remember, is you get random volunteers, and they said these may be people who have no experience with kettlebells or exercise, or they may be people who have done this certification and are just coming here and want a free workout. So you need to assess them, understand their background, understand what they're capable of and what they're not, and teach them as much as they're able to within an hour. And said, I'll tell you right now, if you get a 75-year-old grandma and you try to teach her snatches and she gets hurt, you fail big time.
Well, Dom, it's good that you bring that up, because when the RKC split up and Strong First became an entity, that particular part of it got dropped, and I thought that was a critical part. So in my RKC days, I had 2 clients on the first day, and it's your job to interview the clients. It's your job to instruct them for 20 minutes. It's your job to come up with a 20-minute workout that's appropriate for them. Now, your team leader is watching you during all this time, okay? And they're assessing whether they want you representing their company, okay? And remember this too, is like, the whole RKC and Strong First is so up-tempo, is so charged up. It's easy for people that are training people to be in that mode, and to give somebody way too much, okay? And so you, like, people would go over, the team leader or the assistants would go over and say, okay, you're going to need to chill out a little. We understand why you're like on fire right now, but this is not an on fire person. So, but they were looking for somebody to use quality judgment. And I think in certifications, the training of somebody that you haven't met or seen before, just have bare information on type of thing, then you need to do like a really quick on the spot assessment. It's like a critical thing. Those certifications did that, and I don't know of any that do. And I've seen a lot of people certified by certain organizations that I'll just look at them and go, you're certified, but you really can't teach or relate to someone that you're unsure of where they are, you know?
Awesome. I can see this being a great future topic, maybe more about kettlebells, personal training. But I do want to ask a few questions specifically about ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting while I have you here. So can you just give us a quick overview when somebody hears keto or ketogenic diet, what is involved in that and what are the potential benefits?
Well, mostly what's involved in that, if it's keto or ketogenic diet, most of what's involved in that is changing your whole macronutrient profile. So you're going to eat, and when I say this, like mostly fat, moderate protein, and as many vegetables as you can fit in. And essentially, if you looked at a list of approved quote-unquote keto foods, that's what you would see. So what people need to know when they're doing that is that too much protein will be converted to carbohydrates and sugar in their bodies. So if we're saying a serving size is 3 to 3.5 ounces of beef, fish, chicken, that's what it means. If we put that on someone's plate, they'd be pretty disappointed, and they would look at it and say, where's the rest of it? So the calories that get substituted for, and I don't like to use calories because it's an inappropriate way to look at your macronutrients. It's sort of a measure of heat, and it's not how our body looks at stuff. So what I would say is that once you understand the principles, you can make those foods any way you want, okay? And you have to get over the bugaboo of the fact that people think that fat makes you fat. It does not, okay? Too much of anything makes you fat. The combination of fat and carbohydrates / sugar make you fat. And if we talk about carbohydrates, remember that all starchy carbohydrates, whether it's potatoes, bread, or pasta or anything, ends up as glucose, ends up as sugar. So you can't separate out the two. And in your bodies, you are either a fat burner for energy or a sugar burner, and the two are separate. Most people are sugar burners because that's what they eat, that's what they do. It's what our society runs on.
Now, I appreciate that point about as many vegetables as you can fit in. Because I've heard a lot of people when they think ketogenic, oh, I'll just get a bacon cheeseburger, no bun, and I'm doing keto, right? That's how you do it?
Well, the bacon cheeseburger and no bun, along with 2 sides of broccoli and maybe some green beans, yeah, or maybe Brussels sprouts and bacon, or however you want to look at it. You have to get as many, or whether you're having your whole big giant container of salad greens, and you're doing that, okay. And it's also not just using olive oil and vegetable oils that are liquid, because I started out that way and I just couldn't figure it out, and once I got into it, I read this book called Keto Clarity by Jimmy Moore. And Jimmy was like 400 pounds, and in the first year of his deal on ketos, like he lost 160. And so he said it would gag you to see how much fat I eat. So mouthful of food, mouthful of butter. So and I knew right then that I wasn't eating enough fat. So I switched over, got a bunch of grass-fed butter and grass-fed ghee and coconut oil and stuff that's typically solid at room temperature, that isn't too warm, and just started focusing on that being a big part of what I do, and that changed everything.
Nice.
So it means that when you're in ketosis, or burning fat as fuel, you're not going to be as hungry. You're not going to think about your food, okay? And I don't test my blood, so I don't worry about it. I'm not going to get neurotic about it, which I do about a lot of things. But fewer and fewer I'm getting neurotic about, and that's one of them. So I don't test my blood.
So so you mentioned like testing your blood, presumably for blood ketones.
That's correct.
There's other ways to test it.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to try this out, what does an adaptation phase look like? So I mentioned you're not just going to eat a bacon cheeseburger with no bun and bam, you're in ketosis. What does it look like to adjust to this way of eating and this lifestyle change?
Well, that's a really good question. Okay, and it's going to be different for everybody. That's the other thing too, is about when you're trying out any different sort of approach. That different sort of approach doesn't have to last forever, or it can, but it also requires your input personally to streamline it for you, so to adjust it for you. And what I'll say is the first 7 to 10 days are probably not so hot as far as trying to switch over fuels. And it's you can use a little extra coffee, you can use a little extra tea, you got some bone broth in there and that sort of thing while you're doing this, okay? And then you just have to sort of like wait it out until your body says, okay, if all you're giving me is fat, I guess I got to use it, which our bodies can do. We're set up that way. I mean, if you think about how much glycogen you can store in your bodies, which is carbs, it's not very much. And people can store well over 100 or 150 pounds of fat. So we actually are programmed for it.
Right. So speaking of glycogen and stored fat, another topic that can be sort of interrelated into keto is fasting or intermittent fasting. So you mentioned, am I hungry in the morning? Can you talk a little bit about what intermittent fasting is and why that may be a beneficial complement to something like keto or low carb?
Well, intermittent fasting goes to probably to the original time when humans came on here, where there weren't any supermarkets or supermarkets, and as long as you have money these days, food's easy to come by. Back then it wasn't easy to come by. So however we were put together to go in periods of time where food was available and food was not. And it was not either because crops failed, it was not because we didn't get stuff at a hunt, it was not because of a number of factors. And to put it in a nutshell, it's like the 3 meal a day stuff that everybody kind of does ends up being a habit that they do. And oftentimes, whether you're doing keto or some other dietary regimen that requires space between meals, once you wait out the original hunger feelings, I say I'm hungry, if you wait that out for 5 minutes, oftentimes it goes away. And if you need a lift during times like that, well, America runs on Dunkin', so people have a coffee or whatever they do. Just don't put anything in it. So just the coffee, and if that's necessary. But what happens, which is really so cool about this whole process, is when your body's running on fat, you can go distance between eating and really not care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think is the mechanism with that? So you mentioned like people adapted to burning sugar versus burning fat. If you are accustomed to eating more sugars in your diet, more processed foods, why might it be challenging to start something like an intermittent fasting routine?
Well, because your body has to shift gears, and nothing in your body is automatic, and you have to look at it from your body's point of view. Say, like, we're used to pretty easy fuel coming in through your mouth. Now you want us to go in longer periods of time, hunt out the fats, figure out how to break them down, which we're capable of. We know how to do it, and break them down and change over our fuels. And you can't do that. We can do that. A car can't. You either burn gasoline or you burn diesel fuel in your car or your truck, okay? And they're not going to adapt to a different fuel. Our body is sort of miraculous that it can. And if you look at our capabilities, like I just said before, of how much fat we can store, I once saw a picture of two guys that were cross-country skiing across the Arctic Circle from Siberia to Alaska. One of them started off, they took pictures of him, was in good shape, and one was pretty overweight. At the end of the thing, they had sleds full of food, but at the end of the thing, the guy that was overweight looked like pretty in shape. The other guy looked about dead because he didn't bring enough fat with him to run his stores in a high energy consumption situation like they were in. And they were probably eating 8,000 calories a day, but it wasn't enough. So this other person could tag on to their fat stores and use his fat stores. And that's the whole thing, is about what your body's going to burn, okay? And when you're carrying body fat, when you get hungry in between on a low carbohydrate / ketogenic, whatever you want to call it, it's going to tap into those stores that you're already carrying. It's an ideal situation because we're carrying it for a reason. It's going to use it for that reason. So the other thing I'm aware of is that when you have insulin in your blood from taking in any carbohydrate, your body's capacity to burn fat is about 0.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And if you're eating very frequently throughout the day, like you said, your body needs to make insulin constantly to keep up with that.
Your body's going to put insulin out. That means that it's only going to be dealing with the material that you're taking in. So
Yes.
like a lot of people that are watching this have done 5 meals a day or 6 meals a day. It's like
small meals,
whatever, shakes. It's a second career, It's refreshing if you're doing a low carb / keto, and you're eating maybe twice a day, or sometimes maybe once a day. Then it's refreshing because you have a lot of freedom, and it just frees up time for you, and you're not hungry in between. The whole not hungry in between is an incredible sensation.
So would you estimate, and everybody's different obviously, but like for your particular situation, do you consume, like if we think about it in terms of calories or macronutrient breakdown,
Sure.
Do you think that you consume significantly less calories or macronutrients? Well, certain macronutrients obviously less, but if you're saying like calories, if I eat 5 times a day, the small meals, versus if I do keto and maybe some intermittent fasting, do you think there's a significant difference?
I'd say it's probably overall fewer calories, I think, with the keto than the other,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't really quantify it. And what I would say is that when you eat in a higher fat situation, and whether you check to see if you're in ketosis or not, I typically never do, but then what happens is you get distance. You get distance between when you eat and the next time that you feel like you have to eat. And remember, our meal patterns have had, like a lot of things in our life, have become habits. If we're trying to do install a fitness program for someone that isn't, fitness is a weird thing, but an exercise and stretching and whatever you want to call it program, it's just about installing a new habit for somebody to do that they're not doing. And seems like good habits are harder to install than bad ones.
Mm-hmm.
So and sometimes the holidays come around, and in 2 weeks people install bad habits that go on.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to install a good one, sometimes takes 4 months or 6 months
Sure.
of regular stuff, but the bad ones come in pretty quick.
Sure. So just to wrap us up here, you mentioned Jimmy Moore as a potential resource, somebody who's written some books. I also wanted to add in, Jimmy does a podcast called Livin' La Vida Low Carb. So as Bob mentioned, this is somebody who's been there, done that, lost a lot of weight, and adopted this as a lifestyle. So he sort of documents that as part of his podcast, and he puts a lot of knowledge into his books with co-collaborators. Any other authors or resources that you could think of people might be able to look into if they wanted more info?
Yeah, sure. I would include Nora Gagaudis, Primal Body, Primal Mind, as somebody who's a real expert. Maybe Leanne Vogel. She's a Canadian from Calgary who has like a book that's almost has too much stuff in it. It just like get your brain spinning around. And also women have a, to me, a more challenging time with keto, and she patterns and has suggestions, and all of the stuff by those two people is from somebody that has done it, so that has tried this, tried that, this, that, the other thing, and who really understand it at its roots and have made the mistakes or have changed it around and are willing. Like Leanne has so many ideas about if you run into roadblocks, it's really pretty good. So she has a website that I can't think of it right now, but it's
Google the name.
You
sure.
could Leanne Vogel, and she has a couple of books right now, and she's pretty good. And Nora's really good. She's somebody that figured this out when she went and lived in Alaska and lived with wolves and other stuff. But I've heard her speak. She's like excellent.
Awesome. So any website or contact info that you'd like to share if people want to get a hold of you, maybe ask a question or sign up for any sessions if they're around the area?
Yeah, sure. I have Bob's Health and Fitness is a website, and that my email is bob.uguccioni, which is my name, at gmail.com. And anybody that would have any questions, I'd be glad to interact with them, and anybody who wants to sign up, come on in.
There we go. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. And seriously, if you're around the Western Mass area, you will not find a better coach trainer. Appreciate the time today.
Thanks, Tom.
There we go.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.